Imagine a vacation where every detail is tailored just for you. That's the Dream Vacations and Rentals by PMI difference. We're not just another rental company. We're your personal vacation curators focused on you, our guest. From hand-picked properties to curated local experiences, we craft personalized journeys. Our marketing reaches you with the perfect options, matching your unique travel style. With Dream Vacations and Rentals by PMI, your perfect getaway is just a click away. Visit our website to book your dream vacation today and experience the PMI difference.
All right, welcome back, my beautiful people, to STR News and Digest, your go-to place for everything related to short-term rentals, travel, and the business of tourism. Today, I got a bunch of topics I want to cover. Don't think I'm going to cover all of them, but I really want to hit some of the highlights because there's some very important news that has come out, specifically in the airline industry related to what your rights are and your compensations are if you get bumped from a flight, and in addition to what's happening with regulations across the world. I'm going to talk specifically about Maui. I'm going to talk about how Airbnb is suing New Orleans and how that lawsuit, I don't think they're going to be successful because Europe did the same thing and they're complying. So I'm a little confused. I'm going to go over what's happening. I want to get your thoughts on this lawsuit specifically. I'm also going to talk about Airbnb's new ads that have come out. I'm going to show you the ads. They really are trying to attract more hosts, but a specific type of host, and I'm going to talk about that. Plus, they're also looking to attract more nature adventure travelers. And if you follow this channel, you probably know why they're trying to do that. I'm going to talk about that. But and also some regulatory stuff, specifically that's happening in Maui. So let me see. Let's start with let me see which one I want to start with. Okay, no, let's start with the lawsuits, with Airbnb lawsuit. But before I get into that, a quick update on some acquisition that's happening. If you're not familiar with the company Mint House, they just acquire another company called Locale, right? Now, let's go over what they are and some of the stuff and why I think this is important. Number one is Mint House. It is a residential hospitality operator. And what they have done, they have acquired Locale, which is a company-driven, data-driven or tech-driven company that is what they do is they take multifamily and hostile hotel type properties and they add tech to them. And I'm going to talk about why that's a big deal, right? So let's go. Let me see. So let's go over some of the highlights. So both companies are in the flex living space, which means they're catering to both short-term rentals and long-term rentals, but with an emphasis on multi-unit properties. Again, like for example, with us, if you follow the channel, you know that it's almost going on 2 years now. We bought a large apartment building that was mainly studios and one-bedroom apartments in Bogota, Colombia, and then we converted that apartment buildings to short-term rentals. So it's really more like a hotel mixed with short-term or accommodation or hybrid. I'm sorry, a hybrid of a hotel and short-term rentals. Because if you go to that property specifically, you're going to see we do have a lobby. We don't have all the amenities that you would see in a regular hotel, but we do have most of it. We have laundry service. And again, it's that conversion. But these two companies pretty much work in this space. Now, this acquisition that just happened by Mint is huge, or for me, it's important because it really adds more evidence as to where the short-term rental industry is headed towards, or where the money is going to, right? I've always said, follow the money, because like the FBI says all the time, that is a clue. And it's a clue that I am really taking to heart, because, again, I've said this as well, I'm not the smartest person on the planet. I don't have the biggest team to do a lot of this research. So why not take advantage of companies like Mint, companies like Starbucks, where they're opening, to look at as to where I want to invest in the future. So this acquisition for me is an important acquisition, because as a property manager, if you're looking to scale, one of the fastest way to scale is through acquisition, and even faster is when you do an acquisition, you do it with a multi-unit type deal, right? Either a boutique hotel, a mom and pop motel, a camping site that you can convert into a resort. All these multi-unit properties, and they're endless, and they're only limited by your imagination. Is the way to go, in my opinion, in the future. And it's also, again, the fastest way to grow. And I'm not the only one thinking that that's the case. You've seen a lot of companies do the same. I talked about during last STR News and Digest for last week's, how Marriott, or maybe a couple of weeks ago, how Marriott is getting into this game, and they're buying up. For example, they bought Post Cabin, which was a company that had a portfolio of cabins in rural areas. Well, Marriott just bought them, right? They're also seeing the value and the growth in this industry. Now, let's talk about how Airbnb is suing New Orleans over its enforcement. And let's go over the details. Now, Airbnb is suing the city of New Orleans over new regulations that requires short-term rental platforms like Airbnb to ensure that all properties that are listed on their platforms are abiding by city law. Now, the regulation in question is set to take place in June, or take effect in June, and the city wants Airbnb to make sure that every listed property has a valid permit or licensee to operate as a short-term rental. Now, in the lawsuit, Airbnb calls the new New Orleans enforcement model highly punitive, right? They're saying that it is the punishment is too heavy for a short-term rental operator, and Airbnb is arguing that there's some privacy restrictions here, and that there's a violation of some constitutional rights related to privacy, and more importantly, related to them specifically, or short-term rentals specifically, to provide this confidential, sensitive information to the city of New Orleans. Again, just to recap, New Orleans wants Airbnb to share their data, meaning share everyone that is advertising on their platform within the jurisdictional limits of New Orleans. And they want Airbnb to make sure that those listings have permits. Again, in this particular case, just like I've mentioned in prior STR News, I think it's another over-regulated, or another law that is, number one, in practice, almost unrealistic. Number two, super heavy-handed. And three, something that a company shouldn't be required to do, right? Because Airbnb doesn't, for example, if I advertise on Airbnb, they don't own my property. They don't control my property. So they should not be required to make sure that I'm being compliant, right? To give you another example, I can have a property on Airbnb. if I decide to do some illegal activities on my property, it isn't Airbnb's responsibility to make sure that I'm not doing that, right? It is law enforcement's responsibility to do that. It is the city of New Orleans' responsibility to ensure that those properties that are listed as short-term rentals, that they're enforcing the law. It's not Airbnb's job, right? In this case, I believe that New Orleans is asking Airbnb to do their job, right? But here's where the problem is. And the problem comes as it relates to what's happening in Europe. And let me see if I can find the actual issue, not Europe, in the EU, right? Okay, so in the EU has created almost like a international law that requires data sharing with local authorities and random verification checks. Now, Airbnb is actually backing this regulation. So this is where I think the conflict is, and this is where I think they're going to have issues, because if they're okay sharing data with the EU, they should be okay sharing data with New Orleans. Now, again, New Orleans took it a step further by saying that if they find, by saying that Airbnb shouldn't force their city permitting. That's a little bit, that's where the differences is. And that's where I think it's okay that Airbnb sues, but they shouldn't be suing, and including the fact that they're sharing data, because Airbnb shares data and willingly is sharing data with other countries. In fact, for example, here in South Florida, not only does Airbnb share data, but Airbnb pays like the TDT tax on the behalf of the owner with the government entity. So I don't know how that's going to play. Now, sticking to the EU, let's talk about Madrid and Barcelona and how the mayors of each are taking opposing stands as it relates to short-term rental and the housing crisis. Now, the debate in the European Parliament showcased how each country is handling the housing crisis differently. Now, I'm going to go back on my soapbox and say and mention the fact that none of these agencies, governmental agencies, has shown a direct correlate between short-term rentals and the housing crisis. Not one. In fact, the data shows the opposite is true. And I'm going to use the data from New York City. I talked about that in length before, so I'm not going to get into it, but you can do your research and you can see that the ban or the heavily restricted regulations that New York City placed on STRs in New York, not only didn't help, but it compounded the problem, right? Again, I'm not going to go too deep into that. You can go ahead and look into it. But for example, the mayor of Madrid is advocating for increased housing supply through new construction. People, that's the way to do it, right? Let's add more. If you have a housing crisis, the way to alleviate that housing crisis is not by regulating what the inventory you currently have. No, let's deregulate that. Let's deregulate all the regulations related to construction, and let's create and construct new properties, new housing. Let's make that construction faster, quicker, and easier to do, so you can alleviate the housing crisis, not restrict what you currently have. Barcelona is really doing the opposite, right? Barcelona is pushing for stricter short-term rental control, rent caps, which is rent caps, another form of rent control that I don't think it's ever worked. In fact, I'm going to go back to New York City. The corruption in rent control is insane, people. And a full tourist ban by 2028 in Barcelona. again, these people, they're either ignorant, misinformed, or there's some other underlying nefarious acts that are happening there related to short-term rentals, because it just doesn't make sense, people. And I'm going to go into more on this now as it relates. Let's move on to Maui, because what's happening in Maui, it's even crazier in terms of regulation. Now, people, if you before I go into that, you guys have any questions, comments, just list them. I'll try to get to them during this podcast. But let's move on to Maui and what's happening in Maui. First of all, let's talk about Maui itself. If you're not familiar or not aware, Hawaii, specifically Maui, it is one of the top global travel destinations. Over 3 million travelers visit Maui. Excuse me, Maui specifically, right? And out of those 3 million travelers, the great majority of those people stay at a short-term rental, not hotel. I mean, the economy of Maui is heavily dependent on tourism. And if these tourists, again, and I'm going to give you the number, it's over 7,000 short-term rentals in Maui. And the great majority of the people that visit Maui stay as short-term rentals. So it's a huge part of the island's economy. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough. So here's what's happening. The mayor there, in his infinite wisdom, is contemplating and bringing up regulations to eliminate short-term rentals. He's going to start on July 1st of 2025, but by eliminating short-term rentals in a lot of these buildings that operate as short-term rentals. And he's forcing them to go long-term. Again, please, people, show me the data that actually is going to help anything related to the housing crisis. Because again, he, like many of these other government officials, are using the housing crisis as an excuse to implement some of these bans. But the thing with Maui is that the tourism, or a lot of people that are in the tourist industry, have created studies, and all these key economic studies do not justify the ban, right? It fails to attract or support that banning short-term rentals will actually help anything. So now, what's actually being banned? Let's talk about that. The only thing that is being banned are, again, the 7,000 condos that are on this list that he created, that are currently short-term rentals. It doesn't affect hotels. It doesn't affect resorts, right? So again, I asked the question, show me the data, number one. And then number two, is there an underlying reason, if the data doesn't show that it's actually going to help anything, if they move forward with it, the question is why, right? So the other thing that's really important is that, a couple of things here. Short-term rentals have been part of Maui's culture forever, man, for as long as I can remember. And it became extremely popular again in the early 1990s, with 42% of Maui's property taxes coming from these short-term rentals and tourism, the tourists that come here. I mean, that's a big chunk of money. And as to why they're doing it, I have no idea. Now, I'm going to read some of the stuff that they wrote. Housing crisis versus economic impact. Officials say that the ban will free up housing, but critics argue that these condos aren't practical for long-term residents. High HOA fees, small size, vacation-focused location. key point here, and this is very important, and I'm glad they mentioned this in this report. Majority of the properties on these lists were designed for short-term rentals. They're studios and small one-bedroom apartments, right? They're not meant for families. So again, I don't understand. They can't provide the data. So I don't know why they're pushing this. Just like I don't understand why Barcelona is doing the same thing. I don't understand why New York City did the same thing. I don't understand why a lot of these other locations are going down this route. Now, I do understand that a lot of these people want, they want to get fed. A lot of these government agencies want to get fed, and they do so through regulating these short-term rentals. I've said this before. I'm not totally against regulations. Some of these regulations is necessary. I'm okay paying for a permit and paying certain taxes related to tourism. I'm okay with that, right? But I'm not okay with the over-regulation, the over-restrictions, and like, for example, what New Orleans is doing and mandating that private companies do their job. Not okay with that. Anyway, let's move on to the next story. Where do I want to go? All right, here's a fun one. Let's go to the story related to Airbnb and how these ads hint to its future plans, and why, as a short-term rental manager or a property manager, why you should be paying attention. Even in addition to that, even if you're an investor, why you should be paying attention. So let's watch this video. Let me share my screen. Let's watch this first video.
If you're traveling to be surrounded by nature, don't end up surrounded by hotel.
Excuse me, coming through.
Get an Airbnb and go where hotels can't.
All right, let's talk about that ad, right? There's a couple of interesting things about this ad, right? If you're taking a trip, hold on one second. Let me just make sure I'm in the right spot here. Make sure this doesn't play again. All right, in the ad, picture this. You're going to take a trip on the outdoors, and the ad basically says that if you're going to, let's say, go to some national park, or you want a trip where you want to bond with nature, then it really doesn't make sense to stay in a hotel. It's better to rent an Airbnb that will get you closer to where you want, closer to the intention of the trip, right? I'll give you, there's a couple of examples. If you follow the channel, let's talk about my short-term rentals in Salento, Colombia, La Zona Cafetera. Those geodomes, those tree houses, those tiny homes and cottages are all built within nature, right? For example, my vineyard, the one that we're currently building, it's going to be built 1000% designed around the activities on the outside, right? The vineyard itself, we're creating a orchard, a citrus orchard. We're creating, we're planting a lot of fruits like blueberry, blackberry, fig trees, peaches, where the guests can come, walk through the garden, walk through the vineyard, pick your grapes, pick your fruits. We're also creating trails. Anyways, the point is, if your intention is to take a trip in the outdoors, then a hotel is not the right option. I personally love the commercial. I love how they attack the hotel industry. So let me get your opinion on that. So as to what that is now, according to Airbnb, that ad opens with a, this is what the description is, right? That ad opens with a friendly family excited for nature. However, when they end up in the cramped hotel with no nature, no space, and surrounded by other guests, then it takes away from that feel. Again, I like that. And what I like is how they transitioned to an Airbnb cabin that's nestled in the woods, just like I described it. Just like I said, what we're planning on doing in my vineyard in Georgia, what we did in our properties in La Zona Cafetera in Colombia, what my friends did at what's that place? Why am I drawing it back? Oh, get what Garrett Brown did with his glamping location in Houston, Texas. I mean, there's what Brian Litton did with his campsite in the Northeast, Promised Land, Pennsylvania. I don't know why I'm drawing blanks now. But anyway, that's the play, people. That's the play. And you as a property manager or you as an investor or short-term rental operator, here's why you should care, right? The reason why you should care is because Airbnb is doubling down on nature-based travel, right? Let me say that again. Airbnb is doubling down on nature-based travel. Why? Because that's where the trends for travel, for future travel is heading. So if you are a short-term rental manager and you manage property for other people and you want to stay viable in the game, I suggest you start looking for these owners that have these unique properties in secondary markets, in rural areas, and these people that have unique stays. If you're an investor, that's where you should be putting your money in. You should be putting your money in secondary markets, in unique stays, and or developing your own couples resort, your own nature-based travel destination. For example, I'm getting ready to head out to Colombia, and one of the places we're going to be staying at is in Santa Marta, which is, and it's an eco hotel that's surrounded by nature. There are the tree houses that I've demonstrated on my channel before, and one of the reasons why we're going to be staying there is because they have or they specialize in wellness, and where they have spas, yoga, fitness activities, and that's what I want to do. I'm going to go there. I have to go there to meet some potential clients that want to build these camping resorts. But at the same time, I'm inviting them to this particular location so that they can see what's possible. The other thing is that this is aligning with what I talked about last week's STR News and podcast. That aligns with what Gen Zs and millennial travel trends are headed, right? And I'm going to read right off here. Airbnb's recent Gen Z travel report shows that a huge shift towards nature getaways over city stays. If your property fits that niche, now is the time to optimize your listing and pricing to attract these travelers. Again, Airbnb, I talked about it earlier in this STR News. You don't have to have a team of researchers. Follow the lead. Research. Airbnb has a huge team of researchers out there following trends, and this is where they're seeing the trends, specifically among Gen Zs and millennial travelers. Okay, let's go another area, and I'm going to show you this video. Right, I talked about it last week as well. Remote work is not we're seeing less and less of companies align remote work, and they're going back to corporate travel. So let's watch this video that Airbnb put out. Let me share my screen.
If you have to travel for work a lot, your place is probably empty a lot. Make it an Airbnb and let it work for you.
Oh, wow.
All right, let me stop sharing the screen real quick. All right. Okay, good. I did. One quick second. Let me go back to that ad. Okay, here, like I mentioned, they're making a big push for part-time host, right? As I mentioned before, and if you're not aware, Airbnb has gotten into the management side or the hosting, co-hosting side of the game. They created a system now in which, as a short-term rental operator like myself, I can join their program, and they will recommend me to new hosts, so we can help them optimize their listing, help them manage their property, obviously at a cost, right? We get percentage, Airbnb gets a percentage. So they're getting into what I refer to as the property management side of it through this co-hosting program. And this particular ad is targeting these specific individuals, right? These are people that work for companies that require them to travel a lot. So what Airbnb wants, and the reason why they're targeting these specific people, is because these people they don't want to be managers, right? They don't want my job, right? But they may want to earn some extra money while they're traveling and have other people like Airbnb manage their properties. It's a big push. Again, why should you care as a property manager or a short-term rental operator? Because Airbnb is flooding the market with casual hosts who don't rely on short-term rental as a business, and which means that the rates will be lower, right? Very important here. Okay, I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. And I've had a love-hate relationship with Airbnb, and I'm telling you, as a short-term rental operator, that depends on the short-term rental industry to survive. Here's another example in which Airbnb is only looking out for them, right? They don't necessarily need you, right? They need people like these part-time hosts that they're trying to target. Why? Because of the fact that they're not looking to maximize revenue. All they're looking is to make a little extra money. Most likely, or Airbnb's betting that these people will hire Airbnb to manage the property, and they're betting and hoping that they could do so by putting their properties at a much lower rate than someone like you and I would do. And again, it is in Airbnb's best interest to have low rates so they can have more guests and compete with hotels. Because as you know, between 2021 all the way to 2023, Airbnb in some cases wasn't the cheapest way to travel. If you're traveling as a couple or as a solo traveler, you didn't benefit from Airbnb. It would have most likely been cheaper if you stayed at a hotel than staying at a short-term rental. So to combat this is what Airbnb is looking to do. Again, I'm going to touch on, I'm going to show you one more video. And again, in this particular case, Airbnb is offering their co-hosting or management services with that ad. So let me show you one more ad. Let me go back to share.
If you have a house,
Hey there.
and you love to vacation, Airbnb your house
you.
and help get your vacation on the house.
All right, as you can see, targeting the same, in this case, targeting the same type of host, meaning a part-time host, right? Not a full-time person, because the property's not going to be listed full-time because they actually live on the property. They're just saying, they first targeted the corporate employee that travels a lot, or a person that's job requires them to travel. And now they're targeting individual homeowners that want to travel and want to figure out how to help finance that travel, right? Both are accomplishing the same thing in Airbnb's eye. It's adding more cheaper properties on the platform, and is hoping to get these people to get Airbnb to either co-host or manage the property, right? The goal is the same. Okay, again, if you're a short-term rental operator, pay attention to this. I said this before, I have a love-hate relationship with Airbnb because I have to advertise on them because they do bring in a lot of business, and I'm part of their co-hosting program because I don't want to miss out on opportunities to manage properties and earn some income from this program. Now, I will say that I've been on it for now 2 months, and we're not seeing, or at least I'm personally not seeing, the amount of business that I anticipated. Hence why I think these commercials are coming out, because they want more people to be aware of it. So we'll see in the long run whether it plays out or not. Who knows? Now, let's go on to the last subject, or the last thing I want to talk about, which is when an airline overbooks not be aware, airlines often over. It's been a practice in this industry for a long time. Everyone shows up and they oversold that particular flight. So the Department of Transportation has laid out rules to protect you as the passenger, right? So let's talk about, and I'm going to read right off the Department of Transportation's website. Let's talk about some definitions first. Number one, the process of bumping you off a flight when it's overbooked. There's a couple of things you have to understand. One is voluntary bumping, meaning DOT requires the airline to first seek out voluntary people to get bumped to another flight. And they, in exchange for some type of compensation. What that compensation is, I'm going to talk about in a second, but that compensation could include vouchers, cash, or other benefits. The amount and form of the compensation is negotiable, and I want you to understand that. It is negotiable between you and the airline. Next is involuntary bumping. If there isn't enough volunteers, airlines may involuntarily deny your boarding. Now, here's what happens there. The compensation has to be immediate. The passenger is entitled to compensation on the day and time of the bumping incident. It can substitute transportation. It can substitute transportation departure before compensation is provided. Now, here's how that compensation works. If it's a domestic flight, and this is important, if there's only a 1 hour delay, airline is not required to compensate you. If it's an 1 hour to 2 hour delay, they have to compensate you. Here's the compensation: 200% of the one-way fare, up to $775. Next is if the flight's delayed for more than 2 hours, then it's 400% of the one-way fare up to $1,550. An international flight, same thing. 1 hour delay, no compensation. The 1 to 4 hour delay is 200% of the fare, same amount. And 4 hour delay or more is the same amount. 400% of the one-way fare up to $1,555. Now, here are some exceptions. The passenger did not fully, and the exceptions are really important for you to understand. If you fail to comply with your contract of carriage, I did a whole video on that. If you're not familiar with that, is when you purchase a ticket, you are in contract with that airline and you have to follow those rules. If you don't follow those rules, then you voided that contract and they don't have to compensate you at all. The other one, if there's a security risk, they don't have to compensate you. And then if the flight eventually gets canceled, they don't have to compensate you. But in most cases, none of that applies. The only one that I've always seen apply, because they're going to look to see if you have complied with your contract of carriage. So here's the key thing, or the last thing I want to talk about this, is that it's negotiable. I personally, because I travel, my travel is almost always very flexible. I have the privilege and understanding that I can really benefit from getting bumped. So whenever I hear that the flight's full and they're looking for volunteers, believe you me, I am the first one to the counter. And I am the first one saying, here are my demands. If you meet my demands, I will voluntarily get placed on another flight. And I sit back and wait. Sometimes they'll take my offer right off the bat. Sometimes they'll tell me, well, let me see if we get any more volunteers. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. But understand that it is negotiable. And I have personally negotiated not only a future free flight, but I negotiated cash or vouchers for cash for that flight. And it's not uncommon for them to do that. So anyway, well, my beautiful people, hope this information was useful. If it was, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, follow me on Instagram. Love you guys, and I'll see you on the next one.